This is Morgan Jenkins for GALvanize, and I am so honored to be paired with Mr. Michael Wilbon, co-host of ESPN's Pardon the Interruption. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be paired as well with you, Morgan. So thank you very much.
Michael, our series is called Who Not Do. We're not supposed to talk about what you do, only about who you are. And yet I read in an interview where you said, I'm a sports writer. That's who I am, not what I do anymore. When did your who and do become the same?
They became the same pretty early because I knew from 4 years of college, I kind of knew in high school, but I certainly knew by sophomore year in college. So by the time I was out as an intern, I had 2 summer internships here at the Washington Post in DC, where I still am. And then I went right into it by the time I was 21. I'd already done 2 full years of interning in Lafayette, Indiana, here in Washington at the Washington Post. When I was a senior in college, I was writing for the Washington Post on a freelance basis. So I'm going to say by the time I was 20, no older than 23, when I was full-time at the Post, I knew that's who I was. And so who I was and what I was were the same thing. And it stayed that way until, you read that quote accurately about me saying that. Now I say it's who I am, but it's not really who I am anymore. Those things have changed because I've been out of it for 10 years. I still do some writing for The Undefeated and for ESPN.com, but it's not quite the same as it was all those years when I was 22, all the way through my first 35 years of my professional life. But for all that time, it was the same, one and the same. Or if it wasn't the same, it was as close to the same as I can imagine.
So if I ask you to describe your who without mentioning your job, could you?
Man, that's a really good question. That's one of the best questions I have ever been asked. No, I don't think I could. I can now. I can now the last few years because I'm also a father, to a 12-year-old. So that consumes a lot of time, and that can be a big part of the who, right? A member of several different communities, although some of those communities cannot be described without talking about what I do, because those communities are at least one foot in the world of journalism, of news, of information. So I guess the answer is no, I couldn't. Even though I'm a lot of things now, no, I think it's gone too long where the two are intertwined, where I can't. It's hard to separate them. I cannot completely. What you're asking me is if I can completely separate them, and I don't think the honest answer is yes. I think that to describe who I am, I can't do it without getting into what I am.
Okay, I understand. So you got into this business to tell other people's stories, and now your story is such a focus. You're as big as the names that you cover. Was that first uncomfortable, or did you always embrace it?
Well, not as big as some of the names I cover. No. I still cover some of the biggest names in the world, and I am not that. Yes, there are some names of people I cover that I may be bigger than, but you said at first, was that what? Was it, say it again, was it?
Were you uncomfortable at first?
Oh, was I comfortable? By the time that happened, by the time it became the case, I was not uncomfortable. But there are people that are far more enormous exponentially than my name will ever be. I mean, I covered Michael Jordan's whole career. That alone, right there alone, that's enough that no name will ever be for anybody covering him as large as his. And that's still the case now with writing about LeBron James and writing about Tiger Woods and writing about still some of the biggest people in the field of sport and entertainment. And so it was never uncomfortable because I never ever presumed I was ever going to be mentioned in the same breath as them. And now that there are people who, those guys are very deferential and very complimentary of what I've done in my career, and most of that stuff is just because I'm old now. that when they say that stuff, I say, stop it. You just saying that because I'm old. No, it's not it's more uncomfortable now because it's happening now for the first time these last few years. And yeah, it's a little uncomfortable because I don't think it's true. And so when you don't things are true, when you don't think things are true and praise is being lavished, it should make you a little uncomfortable. So yeah, it makes me a little uncomfortable now because I don't think that's the case. It's flattering, but I don't think it's the case.
You write so many incredible stories about people overcoming trials. What's the biggest challenge of your story so far?
Well, I think one of the great things, Morgan, I haven't had any great trials. Thanks to my parents, thanks to the people who mentored me, thanks to the people who taught me, instructed, worked with, edited, produced. I haven't had any. I haven't had anything that I would call a trial. I certainly didn't have any in the educational path on the way up because I went to a great high school, St. Ignatius College Prep in Chicago, which prepared me for the best journalism school in America, I think, Medill at Northwestern. And I saw that eye roll, Morgan. I can't let you get away with that. So I was prepared for those things. And then my internships were at the Washington Post. So, like, what trials should I have? I mean, everybody's got, I'm not going to call them trials. The difficulty is just in becoming proficient, then good, then really good. Then if you can become great at what you do and you feel that you are and other people acknowledge that you are, then all of that's a process and the whole process can be difficult. But I don't have any story about hardship or I got fired, I had to climb back up and get another job. I don't have any of that. The careers went seamlessly, knock on wood, from my academic career to my print career as a reporter, to being a columnist, to being a contributor to television, to being on television. Those things, there was a natural transition to each one of them. So in saying that, I think it would be doing a disservice to the people who helped me along the way all the time if I said I had trials and tribulations. I didn't. I think the difficulty is in pushing yourself, challenging yourself to be better every step of the way, especially when you have those transitions from reporter to columnist, from columnist to television contributor, to personality, to host and co-host. Each one of those things has its own set of challenges, but I think I know I've had people along the way that have made it so that none of them is what I would call trials and tribulations.
Awesome. Well, that's a blessing to hear.
It is.
How do you felt watching athletes start using their voices for social justice?
I started my career watching that. And then there was, I don't want to say silence, but there was less an emphasis on it. So I started not even my career, my teenage years were spent watching people like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Jim Brown and Muhammad Ali and Arthur Ashe. And then in my professional career, I got to become close to a degree with Arthur Ashe and get to know Muhammad Ali and get to talk to Jim Brown and Bill Russell and others. And so that was very much a part of my coming of age as a journalist, was going to John Thompson, was to go to those people, John Chaney, Tony Dungy, Tony's not much older than me. Tony Dungy's only a couple of years older than me, but everybody else is old enough where I got to see them. I got to see them in action when there weren't people marching to the beat of their drums. They were marching by themselves. When I say by themselves, I mean, yeah, that group of guys, Bobby Mitchell, but they didn't have everybody being an amen chorus to them. And so I've already seen that. And this is the second wave of it. And I'm glad. I'm glad there are people like LeBron James and, the whole chorus of voices that we hear now, that we see now, that we celebrate now. I mentioned LeBron because I think he's the most famous voice now that we have out there. But along the way, going back again, Billie Jean King, Martina Navratilova, these were important voices in the well, first of all, some of them in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but certainly 70s and 80s. When I started my career in the 80s, their voices were being heard as well. So this is not the first time. But I'm glad that this second set of voices is out there. It's a very aggressive set of voices, very assertive, not reticent at all. And it's easier to be aggressive when you look around you and you got people marching and protesting and taking tear gas and kneeling and making their voices heard. I believe, I'm sure it's easier than it was for Muhammad Ali. He had nobody at first. And so Bill Russell, who had nobody at first, Billie Jean King, who had nobody at first. I'm glad to hear these voices. They resonate with a lot of people, and good.
Now, do you have time for one more question?
I got time for whatever you need. I'm good.
Okay. 50 years from now, a segment of PTI comes on in the family room, and a young boy or a young girl asks their mom and dad, "Who is Michael Wilbon?" That they say.
He was a sports writer. He was a journalist. He was a storyteller. And he told other people's story, but from the perspective of his own. He was a son of the Midwest, but a grandson of the segregated Jim Crow South, in that his parents were from there, Georgia and Tennessee. So he was a lot of things. He was a son of the Midwest, a grandson of the Jim Crow South. He was a kid who was a product of Catholic education. He was a sports nerd. He was a reader. He was someone who cared about literacy very much. He cared about music almost as much as he cared about sports. He had a lot of interests that he pursued. And he cared about history, which subsequent generations did not care as much about. And that angered him deeply when he got to be an old crotchety man in his 60s. It angered him deeply that people didn't care about history, and they thought that they were only supposed to pay attention to things that happened once they were born. And that angered him about millennials and angered him about the next generation, whatever they're being called. Is that Gen X? I forget. I don't even know what's after millennials.
Like
Is that Gen X, Morgan?
Yeah, somewhere in between there, XYZ.
Yeah, I forget the alphabet. But as he got older and crotchety, he hated that people weren't as dedicated to that as previous generations. And so he cared about all that stuff, and he cared about his hometown and where he grew up and how he grew up and how that influenced his storytelling. And, that's not a bad start to my obit.
Well, Mr. Wilbon, I am a huge fan of what you do, but it has been a pleasure getting to know who you are, and I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
You are quite welcome.